Welcome to the panel on Russia. I'll start with introducing the panelists. We have Maelle Gavet from Ozon, Dmitry Alimov from Frontier, and Roman Simonov from Russia Partners. Maybe each of you can take a few moments to introduce yourselves.
All right, so I'm going to talk about Ozon rather than myself. So Ozon is the biggest e-commerce group in Russia. We're 15 years old. We did $500 million turnover last year, grew around 70%, and we're on track to do pretty much the same this year. We have in our group 4 different companies. The first one, Ozon.ru, is the Amazon of Russia. The second one, Ozon Travel, is one of the biggest online travel agency in Russia. The third one, Zapato, is an acquisition that does shoes. And then the third one is a B2B business, which does courier delivery nationwide for our companies, but also for other e-commerce and catalog companies in Russia.
Fantastic. Thank you. Roman, can you say a bit about Russia Partners? And yourself?
I represent Russia Partners. We are one of the oldest and biggest private equity firms in Russia, based in Moscow. We're part of New York-based 10 billion plus money manager called Siegel Gav. We've done 50 plus deals. We invest out of fund number 3, 1.5 billion under management. In Russia, I'm personally responsible for technology, media, and telecom investments, software, of course, internet, but the entire practice way larger. Recently, we launched Russia Partners Technology Fund, out of which we can do smaller deals, startups, and we're trying to do deals which touch the region, former Soviet Union, either companies from the region serving domestic market, or going global out of the region, or global companies. They have development offices in Russia, so we can do all kinds of deals.
Great. And Dmitry?
Yes, I'm the founder of Frontier Ventures. Frontier Ventures is a venture/growth fund which is focused primarily on the Russian-speaking space. We invest in early-stage internet companies. And before Frontier Ventures, I co-founded IVI.ru, which is an online video company in Russia.
Fantastic. My name is Harry Nelis. I'm a partner with Accel. So Russia is a country with tremendous promise. They are the biggest online market here in Europe, the 5th largest in the world, and lots of room for growth because there's still very low penetration at the internet level and at the e-commerce level. At the same time, of course, Russia is not an easy place to do business. So Maelle, what are the main hurdles facing entrepreneurs in Russia today?
I think we talk a lot about hurdles, and I'm going to mention them, but I think the most important is what you mentioned at the beginning. It's a huge market, 140 million people. There are only 60 million of them which are online actually, so there's still a huge room to grow. So there is definitely a huge opportunity in Russia. If we talk about hurdles, we in Ozon see mainly 2. The first one is the infrastructure. When you're an entrepreneur in Europe, you tend to rely on, or in the US, you tend to rely on a very developed infrastructure. So you have cloud businesses to help you. You have your national post to do delivery. You have a very good banking system, so you can very easily get credit for your business. You can very easily get credit for your customers. So you have a very good infrastructure in general. In Russia, this infrastructure is being developed, but it's definitely behind what you can see in the West. And for example, in Ozon, we had to create our own delivery company, and only 10% of our orders are delivered by the Russian post. Everything else, we do it ourselves, nationwide in the country, which is the biggest country in the world. The second thing, the second hurdle, is what I would call bureaucracy. And to me, bureaucracy is very different from corruption, despite the fact that it's very often associated. Bureaucracy in Russia is very heavy. You do need to sign a lot of paper in triplicate. So I usually, when I come in the morning, I have pretty much that amount of paper on my table to sign personally. And we have a lot of accountants and legal people to deal with it. So bureaucracy is very heavy. This being said, you can absolutely grow a business in this environment and prosper in this environment despite this bureaucracy.
Right. Any disagreements or added hurdles?
I think it's a fair summary. The only thing that I would add is that very often I think one of the main hurdles that the Russian entrepreneurs face is actually lack of experience, as simple as that. Because I think that just generally Russia transitioned to a market economy only 15, 20 years ago, and there's just not a huge number of entrepreneurs with a lot of experience, and internet is no exception. So I think that's one of the main hurdles that the country is facing right now, still.
Yeah, I would like to add too. I totally agree with what you said. It's another thing which strikes me in Russia. Little things, easy, what people got used to get it, normally in the West, it turns out to be projects in Russia. So productivity overall, in Russia, it's very low compared to the mature markets. So country, in order to grow, has to really improve productivity.
Got it. Now, Russia is an interesting place because it's one of the few places in which players like Yandex, Maelle, VKontakte, Ozon are actually beating the established players, Google, Amazon, Facebook, etc. So why is that, Dmitry? And will that be the case forever, or is that going to change?
Yeah, that's actually a very fascinating question. I've sort of given a lot of thought to this. I think initially this was as simple as the fact that a lot of Western companies just simply ignored the market 10, 15 years ago. And especially given that a lot of innovation and a lot of companies come from US, and as you know, Russia and US have sort of a mixed history in the past few decades. So initially, this was not a market that American and European companies paid attention to. So as a result, emerged a number of large national champions, so to speak, companies like Yandex and Ozon. And now the new companies that are coming in from Europe or coming in from the US, they're facing a completely different landscape. So if they need to find users, all of a sudden, it's no longer sufficient to be able to work with Google. They need to be able to work with Yandex. They need to be able to integrate with the local social networks. And Facebook is number 4, not number 1. So this landscape becomes sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy for the new companies, because you, as a global company, you either have to change your product dramatically to integrate with the local ecosystem, or you're just not going to be successful. And changing the product is just simply not something that large global companies are very good at doing. So this ecosystem kind of self-perpetuates itself, I think.
So God willing, if we are sitting here 5 years from now, do you think the situation will still be the same? Or do you think the Googles, Amazons, and Facebooks of the world will have won and the situation is completely different?
I think
Maelle.
We have no intention whatsoever to let them win. So no, I think for a lot of this company, you're right, they just discovered Russia. So they put Russia on the map maybe a couple of years ago. Before that, Russia was like a big white space. But even now, you see a lot of this big Western company managing Russia, not from Russia. So the most absurd example I've seen was a company who had decided that Russia was in the same cluster as South Africa. And because South Africa was managed from Ireland, so they were managing from Ireland their Russian and South African office, but they were telling us with a straight face that Russia was really important. I think a lot of them just don't get their focus right. They want to invest, but they're not there physically, and you need to be in Russia. Russia is not Germany, it's not Ireland, it's definitely not South Africa, so you need to be there.
But it's definitely changing, Harry. For example, like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, if you're in the boardroom of Amazon.com, they would not discuss Russia strategy, right? They would discuss China strategy, Europe strategy, but not Russia strategy. Now they have headquarters in Europe. Europe is not growing much, and if you're country manager here in Europe and you need to grow your P&L, are you looking here at a huge country which is growing, not only in internet but also GDP and in underlying consumer goods? You have no choice than just go there, and it's changing. And it's changing. Last year, eBay started, hired local country manager, in Russia. And if you look at their Analyst Day, which is available online. Out of 100 slides, like 9 slides were just about their Russia entry. And lots of analysts from Wall Street, grilled them on many questions, but they really seriously came there. And now like 40 packages a day being shipped from US to Russia, across border. Amazon, you mentioned. Up until recently, they shipped to Iraq, but not to Russia. Now they hired again the Russian country manager. His job is to grow the market. Way before, major corporations come to Russia by acquisitions. Now they start in greenfield. So that's a major change. So in 5 years, it probably will be different.
Right. Hey, Dmitry, the flip side of the question that I just asked you is the following. So very few of these leading Russian companies have actually become global leaders. There's a few exceptions like Parallels, Kaspersky, but why is it that so many of these great Russian businesses have not become or are on their way of becoming global leaders? Why is that?
That's a good question. Well, as a dynamic that I see in boardrooms, in companies that we're investors in, we certainly try to focus the management teams on the Russian-speaking market, because we're talking about a 300 million people market, which is very important and core to us. So it's definitely the Russian-speaking market that we worry about first. And as the companies mature, of course, they're going to be looking outside of Russia. And there are some examples of that. For instance, Yandex is building a business in Turkey. But I think the same thing that protects Russia from global competition, which is the fact that the ecosystem is so unique, also makes it more difficult for Russian internet entrepreneurs to go outside, because all of a sudden they need to deal with a different environment, the environment where they're not any longer on the same sort of familiar turf. So that, in a sense, it's a good thing in the domestic and CIS market, but it also works against the Russian entrepreneurs as they venture abroad. But I would say that in the next 10, 15 years, we're definitely going to see more of Russian companies expanding abroad. And I just know of a few companies that are actively contemplating some of the global expansion options.
Is international on the agenda for you, Maelle?
I actually think that a lot of the main reason why a lot of Russian entrepreneurs are not looking outside is because they don't need to. I mean, there is so much to do in Russia. And for example, in Ozone, when we have this discussion at the board, we talk about international expansion. We have opened an office in Kazakhstan, and we've looked at Belarus, and we're probably going to look at other CIS countries. But you look at the size of the Russian market, you look at these 60 million people who are online, but probably no more than 15 to 20 million of them do online purchasing. You look at the remaining 80 million which are not online, and you're like, why am I going to go and conquer the world when I have this huge market in front of me with a GDP per capita which is growing and people who are more and more getting access to internet? Why do I need to defocus? Business is about focus. It's about making sure that you're the best at what you do.
It makes total sense. It makes total sense. Hey, I have a question for you, Roman. So is there too much, or unless you want to add to
this?
You
mentioned two companies. Actually, there are more than two companies. There are more than Kaspersky and more than Parallels, our portfolio company. There are quite a few. Some of them, not known in the West. They're, for example, a Russian company, like Evernote. It's a Russian company. Like VM, right? It's a Russian company. Some of them did very well. It's hard to sell, if you're a Russian company, to enterprise in the West. But if you sell them to consumer, like Kaspersky did, like Acronis did, like Parallels doing, you can successfully penetrate the market, and especially when domestic market is small for your products. So you have no choice than to do it. It is very hard. It's very hard. It required a company to move the headquarters to US in this case, hire management there. It's expensive for a Russian company to do it. It's changing culture, going upside down. But in the end, exit will be not a Russian exchange. So they had to do it, and hopefully we're going to see successes which are measured by exit, and that becomes like contagious. But right now there are several good companies which are in pipeline, not just two.
Right. Dmitry, is there too much capital available in Russia for internet businesses? Too little? and is it of the right kind?
Yeah, in the past couple of years, what we've seen in this market, especially after the success of Yandex and Maelle.ru and the sort of highly publicized IPOs, we certainly have a lot more investors paying attention to this market. But I think the market kind of segmented into two kind of almost different segments. One is the professional investors who have been in this business for a while and sort of can understand how the business should run and can select intelligently the companies with a lot of potential, and a lot of sort of new capital that's coming out from people who haven't historically been in the internet market, some oil guys with money to play with. And I think that capital is chasing a completely different set of deals. So even though, to answer your question, the actual absolute amount being invested in the Russian internet space increased substantially, I don't think that the smart money pool is actually that much larger. So we see some quality companies that are raising capital right now, and they don't necessarily have a huge amount of capital chasing them. So I think that Russia as a market overall is still substantially underinvested compared to Europe, and definitely compared to US and China and other markets.
I'll ask one on the, unless you want to answer.
I think there's not enough money invested in the internet. I think there are actually indeed two segments, but I would more look again from the company perspective. I think there are the big established players like us, like Yandex, but also like other private company which have been able to raise big tickets. And then there are all the others. And raising funds when you are at a stage A to C, I would say, is almost impossible because it's extremely hard to find that money. That money is not there. The Russians are not super keen on investing in this kind of startups. The foreigners are too scared to come into Russia for this kind of not developed enough business. And for that part of the internet population, there's definitely not enough money, not enough investors.
Yeah, I actually disagree with that. We see a lot of Russian, oligarchs, made money in metals mining, real estate. They're throwing a lot of capital on early stage companies, and you see like 40, 30 companies. People do just in 1 year. Makes me wonder how can they actually process that, one deal a week. And we have, many companies like that. Right? And then there are many big companies which has been big before. But there are not many B and C rounds. We would hope that, from 50 companies, at least 5 will come to us for the next expansion stage, and it's not happening. It's not happening.
Okay, the final question for the panel. So Russia, land of opportunity or brain drain? And I'll start with you, Maelle, because you obviously weren't born in Russia, so you grew up in France. What attracted you to Russia? And do you think more people will follow your path, or do you think many of the great Russian entrepreneurs will fly over, cross the pond, land in Silicon Valley and start their businesses there, or expand them there?
I think it's both. I think it's an amazing land of opportunity when you have the energy to do it, because it's a country that requires, as an entrepreneur, a lot of constant energy. But there is also a brain drain, because a lot of Russian feels that it's going to be easier for them to get business out of the ground outside of Russia because of the bureaucracy and the infrastructure problem I had. So if you want, this is definitely an amazing land of opportunity.
Dmitry, Roman?
Well, look, I don't think it's just that black and white. I think that there's increasingly more of an exchange. People coming from Silicon Valley trying to do business in Russia, or people from Russia going to Silicon Valley. And I think it's very healthy, actually. I think Russia is being integrated increasingly more and more into the global landscape. And sort of events like this would be an example of that. And I think it's very healthy for the ecosystem.
And I think that question is a question from the 90s. Right? In the 90s, it was exactly, is it opportunity or brain drain? Right now, lots of good entrepreneurs, they actually pack their bags and go to Silicon Valley. Right? We see like several companies like that formed by Russian immigrants. But yet they keep their development team in Russia. They fly back and forth, so they basically do both.
Yeah.
They know how to capitalize on the trend, and we see more and more opportunities like that.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
Okay, this concludes our Russian panel. Thanks very much for your attention, and have a great conference. Bye-bye.